The morning sun filtered through thin, white curtains, dappling the floor of Lindsey Carter's childhood bedroom with trembling gold. Outside, Napa Valley's misty vineyards waited, quietly holding their breath, as if the entire world sensed something extraordinary was about to happen. Lindsey sat motionless in front of her grandmother's old mirror, hands clasped tightly in her lap, her wedding dress a cloud of ivory tulle and hope. For a moment, the only sound was the whisper of her breath and the gentle ticking of the antique clock above her dresser. She tried to focus on the day's promises, Matt's smile, the music that would play as she walked the aisle, the vows she'd practiced beneath her breath. But another rhythm called her, a deep, uneven pounding. Shadowfax. Lindsey turned her head toward the window, and there he was, her companion of more than a decade, the great black stallion she'd rescued all those years ago when both of them were young and unsteady. The horse was pacing the paddock, his once glossy coat now streaked with age, his white blazed face peering toward her window, as if he could see through the glass and time itself. He pawed at the ground, ignoring his untouched breakfast, nostrils flaring with agitation. Lindsey's heart twisted. Shadowfax had never missed a meal, not even on stormy nights when thunder shook the barn. Behind Lindsey, the Carter farmhouse bustled with wedding day chaos. Her mother's voice rose from the kitchen, sharp with excitement, while her younger cousins shrieked and darted down the hallway, trailing ribbons and laughter. Somewhere her father was practicing his toast, words trembling with pride and anxiety. But for Lindsey, the world narrowed to the faint, hollow thud of Shadowfax's hooves and the frantic way he pressed against the fence. She pressed her palm to the window, willing him to settle, to tell her in that silent language they'd shared for years that everything would be all right. Suddenly, her best friend Brooke burst through the bedroom door, bouquet in one hand, her cheeks flushed with concern. "Lindsey, Shadowfax isn't eating. He's trembling. He won't let anyone near him." Brooke's words tumbled out in a rush, barely catching her breath, eyes wide with the kind of worry only old friends share. Lindsey's pulse quickened. She'd spent countless nights in Shadowfax's stall, soothing him through colic and old wounds. But never had she seen him like this. She gathered her dress, stumbling to her feet, layers of silk rustling as she crossed the room. "He was fine last night, wasn't he?" she whispered, searching Brooke's face for reassurance, but finding only fear. Brooke shook her head, voice low. "I tried carrots. He won't touch them. He just keeps—" Brooke hesitated, glancing at Lindsey's wedding dress, as if remembering all the expectations riding on this day. But Lindsey was already moving, shoving her feet into worn boots, not caring that mud would ruin the delicate lace hem. Her heart thudded, echoing the anxious rhythm outside. In the yard, the scene was worse than Lindsey feared. Shadowfax's muscles quivered beneath his sweat-darkened coat, his sides heaving, eyes wild and rolling. He sidestepped nervously as Lindsey approached, but when she called his name, just a whisper, he stopped, nostrils flaring. Lindsey moved closer, one careful step at a time, the hem of her dress dragging in the wet grass. She reached out, fingers trembling, and touched his cheek. Shadowfax leaned into her touch, shivering, his breath rattling. She glanced over her shoulder. Brooke hovered nearby, torn between worry for Lindsey and the inevitable disaster awaiting inside if the bride didn't return. Lindsey's father emerged from the barn, his face shadowed. "He won't settle, Linz. Something's wrong, He stopped, eyes flicking to Lindsey's gown, the hope and pride in his gaze replaced by worry. For a moment, time suspended. The vineyard hills held their green silence. The farmhouse noise faded, and all that remained was the fragile bond between a woman and her oldest friend. A sudden burst of laughter from inside the house shattered the moment. Lindsey looked at her reflection in the window glass. Torn. Today was supposed to be about love, promises, a future she'd dreamed of. But standing in the early light, Lindsey understood what had always been true. Love wasn't just an aisle or a promise. It was standing in the mud, in the mess, holding on when no one else would. She heard a faint groan from Shadowfax. He lowered his head, pressing his nose into her shoulder, his breath warm and labored. Lindsey felt something crack inside her. Was this it? Would she lose him on the very day meant to start a new life? Brooke's voice cut through her thoughts, soft but urgent. "What do we do, Linz?" Before Lindsey could answer, her fiancé Matt appeared in the doorway, suit jacket slung over one arm, his face creased with worry. "The guests are arriving. We need you inside, but I'll do whatever you need." His hand hovered, gentle but uncertain, ready to steady her or lead her away. Lindsey swallowed hard, staring at the trembling stallion beside her. For years, Shadowfax had carried her through heartbreak, through storms, through all the broken places in her life. Today, she realized, was no different. She pressed her cheek against his mane, voice barely a whisper. "Not today. Please, just hold on." The sun climbed higher, burning away the valley mist, and inside the house a wedding waited. But outside, in the paddock, Lindsey Carter stood suspended between two worlds. One she was meant to begin, and one she was terrified to lose. She closed her eyes, listening to the thump of Shadowfax's heart, the frantic thud of her own, and knew in that instant everything would change before the day was done. The late morning sun slanted over the Carter farmhouse as Lindsey pressed her cheek to Shadowfax's mane, torn between the wedding she'd planned for months and the frantic pounding of her horse's heart beneath her palm. Somewhere behind her, a horn honked, followed by a shriek of laughter, her bridesmaids, ready to sweep her off to the vineyard chapel. But Lindsey couldn't move, not until she was sure. Her father's hand settled gently on her shoulder. "Honey, the car's ready," he said, voice thick with tension. For a split second, Lindsey imagined walking away, letting Shadowfax go. But that was impossible. This horse wasn't just a pet. He was family, the witness to every heartbreak and joy of her life. Brooke appeared at her elbow, holding the hem of Lindsey's mud-stained dress, trying to coax her inside. "They're waiting," she whispered. Lindsey looked from Brooke's worried face to her father's pleading eyes, then down at Shadowfax, who trembled, refusing to meet her gaze. Lindsey's jaw set. She turned to her father. "He's coming with us," she said, "right behind the car. I won't leave him." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then her father nodded, love and resignation mixing in his tired smile. He hurried off to fetch the old leather halter. In the chaos that followed, Lindsey's wedding car, white, decked out in ribbons and wildflowers, pulled forward, trailed by her father, who led Shadowfax with gentle, murmured encouragements. Wedding guests in pastel linen and hats gathered along the driveway, watching the strange, solemn parade with wide eyes. Some whispered, some frowned, but Lindsey ignored them. She climbed into the back seat, her dress crushed beneath her, and craned her neck to watch her horse every inch of the way. Inside the car, Matt reached over, threading his fingers through hers. "You're sure?" he asked quietly. Lindsey met his eyes, searching for disappointment, but found only steady support. She squeezed his hand. "He's family," she said simply. Matt nodded, lips pressed into a determined line. He understood. Maybe not completely, but enough. As the car wound through rolling hills toward the chapel, every jolt and turn made Lindsey's heart race. She watched her father and Shadowfax in the rearview mirror. The old stallion's ears flicked back, sweat foaming along his neck, each step a battle. Sometimes he stumbled, dragging his hooves, but her father kept moving, whispering old songs from Lindsey's childhood. The garlands fluttered in the breeze, petals scattering like blessings and warnings across the road. The chapel appeared at the crest of a hill, sun shining off its whitewashed walls. Guests gathered on the steps, fanning themselves, laughing and craning for a glimpse of the bride. As Lindsey stepped from the car, a hush fell. Her gown was already streaked with mud, her boots ruined, hair tousled from the wind. But none of that mattered. She was only aware of the horse behind her, struggling up the gravel drive. Suddenly, at the base of the chapel steps, Shadowfax stopped dead. He planted his hooves, head down, blocking Lindsey's path. For a moment, it seemed like he was a living barricade, refusing to let her pass. Lindsey's father pulled gently at the lead rope, but Shadowfax wouldn't budge. His eyes, once so bright, were clouded and wild, nostrils flaring with every ragged breath. Lindsey dropped to her knees beside him, cradling his head. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, voice shaking. "I'm right here." Matt hurried down the steps, jacket flapping in the wind, and tried to coax the stallion away, murmuring soft encouragements. The wedding guests watched in stunned silence as the scene unfolded. A bride in white, kneeling in the dust, her horse blocking the chapel door like some ancient guardian. Brooke hovered at the edge of the crowd, hands pressed to her mouth. Shadowfax's legs buckled. He shivered violently, almost sinking to his knees, breath rasping through clenched teeth. Lindsey's panic spiked. She looked up at Matt, her voice raw. "Something's really wrong. He's never been like this." Matt knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around her shoulders, trying to steady them both. "We have to get him help," he said. "Now." For a heartbeat, Lindsey was aware of the crowd. Her mother's horrified gasp, her cousin's wide, anxious eyes, the whispered doubts of family friends. She should be worried about the wedding, about disappointing everyone, about tradition and expectations. But none of that mattered. The decision was instant and absolute. She stood, dress dragging in the dust, and faced the crowd. "I'm sorry, everyone," she called, voice clear and trembling. "I know today was supposed to be about us, but he comes first. Shadowfax's family. I can't walk into that chapel knowing he's suffering." The silence was so complete she could hear a bird call in the far-off oaks. Matt moved to her side, his arm around her waist, and nodded. Her father didn't hesitate. He dropped the lead rope, scooped it back up, and started for the truck. Brooke broke away from the crowd and ran to open the passenger door. Lindsey climbed in beside her horse, not caring that her dress would be ruined, that her carefully arranged life was unraveling with every moment. As the truck sped away from the chapel, wedding bells rang hollow in the distance. Lindsey pressed her forehead to Shadowfax's neck, feeling his heartbeat flutter beneath her skin. Her family crammed into the cab, voices thick with fear and hope. The wedding, the perfect day, the promises, all of it faded to the background as they barreled down country roads toward the emergency clinic, mud streaking the train of Lindsey's dress. In that moment, as vineyards flashed by in blurs of green and gold, Lindsey understood. Love was not what happened at the altar, but what you did when someone you loved was hurting. She looked at Matt, at her parents, at Brooke, all of them crowded together in the chaos, and knew this day would change everything. Whatever happened, they would face it together. The future, once so neatly planned, was now uncertain. But Lindsey Carter had made her choice, and she would not look back. The truck roared through the shroud of morning fog that clung to the valleys, the world outside a blur of cypress trees, weathered barns, and pale rows of vines disappearing into mist. Inside, Lindsey sat in the open bed of the pickup, her wedding dress pooling around her knees, its train stained with streaks of earth and fear. One hand gripped the battered rail, the other cradled Shadowfax's graying head in her lap. The old stallion's breath came in uneven gasps, each one rattling through his chest, each exhale a reminder of time slipping through her fingers. Lindsey's father drove with silent urgency, every muscle in his body tight as he navigated the twisting back roads. Matt was beside him in the cab, cell phone pressed to his ear, talking to the vet's office. Behind them, Brooke rode with Lindsey, the wind tugging at her hair, her hands clenched and knuckles white. No one spoke. The only sounds were the truck's engine, the uneven pounding of Shadowfax's heart, and the low murmur of Lindsey's voice as she whispered to her horse. "You remember the first day I saw you?" Her voice wavered, barely audible above the wind. "You were just skin and bones, all ribs and wild eyes. You wouldn't let anyone near, but you let me touch your nose. That night, after everything with Mom and Dad, when I couldn't sleep, you let me sit in the straw beside you. I thought I was saving you, but you saved me, old friend." Lindsey pressed her forehead to Shadowfax's cheek, her tears dampening his coarse mane. She felt his body tremble against her, a fragile weight that suddenly seemed unbearably precious. Memories surged. Every thunderstorm she'd weathered in the old barn, Shadowfax standing guard through lightning and wind, the summer mornings spent galloping through dew-soaked grass, her laughter trailing behind, the nights when panic would seize her heart, cold and breathless, and only his steady presence, the velvet warmth of his muzzle against her cheek, could anchor her. Lindsey clung to those moments, desperate to memorize every detail: his musky scent, the white streak running down his face, the way his ears flicked at her voice even now. As the miles fell away, Matt turned in his seat, reaching through the window to take Lindsey's free hand. His grip was warm, steady, grounding her in the present. "The wedding can wait," he said softly, eyes locked with hers. "Shadowfax is family. We'll get him through this. Together." Lindsey squeezed his fingers, gratitude and terror warring in her chest. She forced herself to breathe, matching her rhythm to the soft rise and fall of the stallion's flank. Suddenly, Brooke's phone buzzed. She fumbled to answer, her voice shaking. "Hello? Yes, this is Lindsey Carter's horse. Shadowfax. He's struggling to breathe." She listened, her brow furrowing. "Yes, we're 10 minutes away. No, we didn't stop. Yes, he's lying down. We'll be there soon." She pressed the phone to Lindsey's ear so she could hear the vet's urgent voice. "Don't delay," Dr. Chavez said. His tone clipped. "All business. Bring him straight in. No more stops. It sounds critical. He may be having a cardiac event or severe colic. You have to hurry." Lindsey's chest tightened as fear clawed up her throat. She met her father's eyes through the dusty back window, and he stepped harder on the gas, the engine protesting as the truck whipped around a sharp bend. For the first time all morning, Lindsey let herself panic. The road became a tunnel, trees racing by, the distant echo of wedding bells ringing in her ears, bells that belonged to a different world, a life she might never return to if Shadowfax slipped away. Brooke leaned close, brushing a strand of hair from Lindsey's face. "He's strong," she said quietly, as if repeating a prayer. "If anyone can pull through, it's him. Remember last winter? He survived that infection no one thought he'd beat. Lindsey tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "He's older now," she said, her voice barely more than a breath. "He's tired. And I—" She broke off, burying her face in Shadowfax's neck, feeling the heat of his body, the slow, weakening pulse beneath her fingers. Minutes crawled by. Every second stretched tight with dread. The world outside felt suspended. No birdsong, no laughter. Just the relentless rush of wheels on asphalt and the muffled sob of Lindsey's heart. She pictured the chapel waiting, the guests milling in confusion, the aisle lined with petals and empty promises. None of it mattered. Not now. Not with Shadowfax's life hanging by a thread. A sudden lurch announced their arrival at the clinic. The truck skidded to a halt, gravel spraying. Lindsey's father leapt out, throwing open the tailgate. Two vet techs rushed forward with a stretcher, their movements brisk and practiced. "Let's move!" one shouted, and within seconds they had Shadowfax gently loaded, his legs quivering as he tried and failed to stand. Lindsey stumbled after them, clutching the tattered remains of her dress, her vision swimming with tears. The world inside the clinic was bright and cold, the air thick with antiseptic and urgency. Voices shouted orders, machines beeped, and Shadowfax disappeared behind swinging doors. Lindsey tried to follow, but Brooke caught her, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "You did everything you could," Brooke whispered, her own voice breaking. Lindsey shook her head, refusing to believe it was enough. She pressed her fists to her eyes, willing herself not to crumble. Matt joined them, wrapping both women in his arms, his steady presence the only solid ground beneath Lindsey's feet. "Whatever happens," he murmured, "we're here. Together." In that sterile hallway, Lindsey waited, heart in her throat, every muscle trembling with hope and terror. She knew she was racing not just against the clock, but against fate itself. And she wasn't ready to say goodbye. Not now. Not ever. The hush inside the emergency clinic felt nothing like the vibrant commotion of a wedding morning. Lindsey stood in the barn aisle just past the sliding doors, blinking against the fluorescent light. Her dress stained and torn, hands shaking. The cool air pressed in, sharp with the scents of iodine and hay. Shadowfax's labored breaths echoed from the exam room, each one a fragile thread holding Lindsey's heart together. Matt stood beside her, his hand resting on her lower back, anchoring her as nurses and techs hurried past with clipboards and IV bags. Her father paced at the end of the aisle, rubbing his temples, while Brooke clutched her phone, checking for any word from the vet. The wedding, flowers, music, champagne, friends, felt a world away, irrelevant now, as if it belonged to another version of herself. All that mattered was the old black stallion behind the swinging doors. Suddenly, Lindsey's mother appeared at her side, silent, her own eyes red-rimmed and wet. She didn't speak. She just slipped a thick, soft blanket around Lindsey's shoulders and gently squeezed. For a moment, Lindsey let herself lean into her mother, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and flower, feeling again like a child lost in a storm. Minutes ticked by. Lindsey barely noticed the passing time. All she could do was picture Shadowfax, hooked up to machines, needles in his neck, the vet's hands gentle but unyielding. She flinched at every raised voice, every metallic clang. Her mind replayed memories in a relentless loop. Shadowfax waiting by the fence for her after school, their secret rides through fields of wild mustard, the time he'd stood guard through her first heartbreak, nuzzling her tears away as if he could shoulder all her pain. Now it was her turn to bear the weight. The exam room door swung open, and Dr. Chavez stepped out, still in his coveralls, his expression grave but kind. Lindsey met his gaze, bracing for the worst. He spoke gently, his words soft but unflinching. Lindsey, he's very sick. Shadowfax has a severe heart condition. There's fluid building up around his heart, and it's making it hard for him to breathe. He's in pain. We can try medication to ease his discomfort for a little while. Maybe a few days, maybe a week at most. But he's old, and his heart, it's just worn out. The words struck Lindsey like stones. Her knees buckled and Matt caught her, guiding her to a bench. She stared at the vet, searching his face for some glimmer of hope, a secret solution. "Is there?" she choked out. "Anything we can do? Surgery, a treatment, anything?" Her voice faded into silence. Dr. Chavez shook his head, voice gentle but final. "Not for this, Lindsey. I'm sorry, you have a choice. You can try to keep him going a little longer, but it will be hard on him, or we can help him pass peacefully, surrounded by everyone he loves." A sob rose in Lindsey's chest. She buried her face in the blanket, Matt's arms around her, her mother's cool hand smoothing her hair. For a moment the world tilted. She'd known, deep down, that this day would come. But not today. Not on her wedding day. Not with so many goodbyes left unsaid. She looked up at Dr. Chavez, tears streaming. Can I take him home for one last day? I want to say goodbye. I want him to be in his pasture, not here, please." The vet nodded. "Of course. I'll give you medication to keep him comfortable for the night. Bring him back tomorrow, or call me if you need help. I'll make sure he's not in pain." Lindsey nodded, words failing her. The clinic staff moved quietly, preparing Shadowfax for the ride home. When Lindsey stepped into the exam room, she found her old friend standing shakily in a padded stall, IV line dangling from his neck, eyes glassy but alert. She wrapped her arms around his thick neck, burying her face in his mane, whispering all the things she'd never said, how much he'd meant to her, how he'd taught her to be brave, how she wished she could have been enough to save him. Matt and Brooke helped guide Shadowfax into the trailer, moving slow and steady, every motion deliberate. The drive back to the ranch was silent. Lindsey rode with her horse, stroking his neck, humming the old lullabies her grandmother had sung, the notes trembling but true. The sun was setting by the time they pulled into the driveway, golden lights spilling over the rolling hills, painting everything in bittersweet beauty. The family gathered in the barn. Lindsey spread thick blankets and hay, making a soft bed. She and Matt sat with Shadowfax, stroking his face, telling stories, laughing and crying in the half-light. Her father brought apples, her mother a plate of wedding cake, which Lindsey broke into tiny pieces and fed to her old friend. Shadowfax's ears twitched at the taste, his eyes soft, and for a little while, Lindsey could almost pretend nothing had changed. As dusk deepened, Lindsey sat alone with Shadowfax. She sketched his profile in her journal, every line a silent prayer, her fingers smudged with graphite and grief. The world outside the barn faded into silence, the wedding now just a story someone else had lived. In its place, she found something deeper, a kind of sacred peace, a promise to love, even when it hurt, to say goodbye on her own terms. Lindsey pressed her forehead to Shadowfax's. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "we'll walk the pastures together, just you and me. One last day. You saved me, old friend. Let me carry you home." And in that quiet, tear-streaked moment, Lindsey Carter found her new altar, a place not of vows and veils, but of presence, gratitude, and love that would not let go. The Carter Ranch barn glowed golden in the late afternoon, shafts of sunlight slipping through knotholes and settling on dust motes that danced in the heavy air. Outside, the remnants of what was meant to be a perfect wedding day drifted in the breeze. Petals from abandoned bouquets, empty folding chairs, ribbons fluttering from the porch rails. Inside, everything had changed. The official wedding had been abandoned, the chapel empty, the reception forgotten. Yet somehow Lindsey felt a deeper sense of rightness here, in the barn where her life had always made sense, surrounded by the people and the horse that meant everything. Shadowfax lay stretched on thick blankets of hay, his breathing slower but less labored with the help of medication. His eyes, though tired, still followed Lindsey as she knelt at his side, her wedding dress now a patchwork of grass stains, tears, and stubborn hope. Matt crouched beside her, one hand gently stroking the old stallion's neck. The rest of the family lingered quietly at the edge of the barn, uncertain but respectful, holding back so this strange, beautiful moment could happen. Matt cleared his throat. "The guests have all gone home, Lindsey. Your parents told everyone what happened. He hesitated, glancing at her for permission to continue. "They want to know if you're okay." Lindsey reached for his hand, squeezing it. "I'm better here than anywhere else. This is where I need to be." She looked up at her mother, who nodded, eyes shining with understanding. The family closed in, forming a gentle, supportive circle. Brooke, still clutching her crumpled bouquet, wiped her cheeks. "You know, if you want, we can still do the vows right here. Shadowfax should be with you. He's always been your witness." Lindsey blinked in surprise, then smiled, a trembling, grateful smile that ached with loss but also with something that felt like joy. "He's my family," she said, voice quiet but steady. "He's always been my witness." Matt stood, took her hand, and helped her to her feet. In the hay-scented twilight, they faced each other, ringless, imperfect, utterly honest. Her father cleared his throat, pulling an old Polaroid camera from a shelf. "For the family album," he said, his voice thick. Brooke hit record on her phone, trying not to let her tears drip onto the screen. The barn was silent, except for the gentle shuffling of Shadowfax's hooves and the birds settling in the eaves. Lindsey felt every eye on her, every breath in the close, warm air. She reached down and rested her hand on Shadowfax's mane. The old stallion's head nudged against her palm, soft, trusting. Matt took a deep breath, holding her gaze. "I know this isn't the wedding we planned," he began, his voice shaking only a little, "but I can't imagine a more honest start. We're standing here, surrounded by everyone we love. Lindsey, I promise to love you, to stand by you no matter what storms come. I promise to laugh with you, to cry with you, to fight for you, and to never let you face life's hard moments alone." Lindsey's hand trembled as she reached for Matt's. Her dress was torn, her hair tangled, but she had never felt more sure of herself. "Matt, today isn't perfect. Life never is. But you're here. You never turned away. Not when it got messy. Not when I chose Shadowfax. Not when I needed you the most. I promise to love you, to choose you every day, to fight for our happiness, to be your partner, your friend, your family. And I promise to always keep my heart open, even when it hurts." Her voice broke as she looked down at Shadowfax, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You taught me what loyalty means," she whispered, fingers tangling in his mane. "You showed me how to trust, how to heal. You are my witness, my friend, and my family. Thank you for everything." Shadowfax, as if understanding, nudged her gently. Lindsey's family and friends gasped softly. For a moment time froze. Golden light washed over them all, the dust in the air sparkling like confetti, every breath full of love and pain and gratitude. Matt slipped a ring onto Lindsey's finger, his hands shaking. Then she did the same for him. Brooke, tears streaming, whispered, "You may kiss the bride." Matt laughed, a choked, joy-filled sound, and pulled Lindsey into a fierce embrace, kissing her softly as the barn erupted in applause, the sound echoing off old beams and new memories. Shadowfax between them raised his head, brushing both of their hands as if sealing the promise. Afterwards, as dusk settled in, Lindsey knelt beside Shadowfax, stroking his face. Guests who hadn't left yet wandered in, drawn by the laughter and the sense that something important was happening here. Something bigger than a traditional ceremony. Even neighbors who'd heard the story drifted in, hats in hand, offering quiet congratulations and a few shared tears. Brooke handed Lindsey her phone. "This will go viral, you know. People need to see what real love and devotion look like." Lindsey smiled, exhausted, her cheeks streaked with dirt and tears. "Let them," she said. "Maybe it'll remind them what matters." By the time the barn was empty and the last rays of sunlight slipped away, Lindsey realized their wedding had become a different kind of story. One built on presence, sacrifice, and the courage to love fiercely, even in the face of loss. It wasn't about perfection anymore. It was about loyalty, honesty, and the family you choose. As she lay down beside Shadowfax, Matt curled at her back. Lindsey closed her eyes, listening to the horse's slow, steady breaths and the soft hum of her husband's voice promising her forever, right there in the golden heart of the barn. In the days that followed, the world outside the Carter ranch seemed to slow, as if time itself were honoring Shadowfax's final chapter. Lindsey and Matt quietly called off their honeymoon, never once speaking the word sacrifice, but neither doubted that this was where they belonged. They moved their lives into the barn, laying a mattress of quilts and old comforters in the hay beside Shadowfax's stall. Lindsey traded silk for flannel, pearls for an old, soft hoodie, her wedding ring glinting with each gentle stroke of the horse's mane. Every morning, Lindsey woke to the soft, rhythmic sound of Shadowfax's breath and the warm weight of Matt's arm around her waist. The barn filled with the mingled scents of alfalfa, coffee, and the faint tang of apples, which Lindsey sliced into thin wedges to tempt Shadowfax's appetite. She fed him by hand, watching for the tiniest flicker of pleasure as his lips tugged at the fruit. Sometimes he managed only a bite. Other times he refused it all. On those days, Lindsey's heart clenched with dread, but she forced herself to smile, to whisper encouragement, to keep the fear at bay for a few more precious hours. At sunset, the three of them, Lindsey, Matt, and the ailing stallion, would take slow walks along the vineyard's winding dirt lanes. Matt guided Shadowfax with a steady hand on the halter, while Lindsey walked on the other side, murmuring stories of their shared past. They moved at a snail's pace, pausing to let Shadowfax sniff wildflowers or stand quietly as the last gold light slipped over the hills. Sometimes a neighbor or friend would wave from the road, their faces gentle, their eyes full of quiet understanding. The wedding had become legend in the valley, a story that passed from porch to porch, growing in its bittersweet beauty. The nights were long, and Lindsey barely slept. Instead, she sat beside Shadowfax in the hush of the barn, sketching his profile by lantern light. She captured every detail, the scars from old injuries, the curve of his ear, the way his lashes framed his deep, wise eyes. Each drawing was an attempt to hold on to what was slipping away. She filled her journal with memories, afraid that if she didn't write them down, they'd dissolve like morning mist. On one page, she wrote about the storm when Shadowfax broke out of his paddock to stand by the kitchen window, refusing to leave until Lindsey opened the door and let him shelter inside. On another, she described the way he nuzzled her shoulder after her first big loss, silent but steadfast, as if to say, "I am here." Matt became her silent partner in this vigil, never complaining, never pressing her to move on. He brought coffee in the mornings and blankets at night, learning to read Shadowfax's subtle cues, the flick of a tail, the slump of a shoulder, the softening of his gaze. One night, Lindsey woke to find Matt stroking Shadowfax's neck, humming an old lullaby Lindsey's grandmother used to sing. The sight brought tears to her eyes, a mingling of grief and gratitude so raw she had to step outside into the cool air, gulping deep breaths until the stars sharpened overhead. There were moments of laughter, too, unexpected bubbles of joy that broke through the heaviness. One afternoon, Shadowfax mustered the strength to chase a chicken across the barnyard, sending Lindsey and Matt into a fit of laughter as feathers flew and the indignant hen squawked her outrage. Lindsey snapped a blurry photo, her phone shaking with mirth, determined to remember the good with the bad. As the days passed, Lindsey began to notice the quiet ways Shadowfax had shaped their lives. He wasn't just her companion. He was the reason Matt had learned patience, why her father had softened with age, why her mother left a carrot in her pocket every morning. He was a thread that bound the family, teaching them to love without condition, to show up even when it was messy and hard. Lindsey saw how her own heart had grown, how she'd learned to let go of perfection, to cherish small moments, to say thank you even as she prepared to say goodbye. One evening, as the sky blazed purple and orange, Lindsey sat at Shadowfax's side, her journal open to a fresh page. She began to write, "I always thought love was a big event, a wedding, a declaration, a promise. But real love is in the ordinary days. It's apples shared in silence, long walks at sunset, staying up all night because someone you love is scared. It's presence, not perfection." Matt came and sat beside her, pulling her close. "He's changed us," Matt murmured, voice thick. "All of us. I never thought I could love an animal the way I love him. I think he taught me how to be a husband." Lindsey smiled, laying her head on his shoulder, tears sliding down her cheek. "He taught me how to be brave." Together they watched the stars emerge above the barn, each one a silent witness to the love and loyalty that had become their true story. The wedding had faded into memory, replaced by the quiet grace of these days. Days when every small act of care, every whispered goodbye, every shared laugh and tear became more precious than any ceremony. In the hush, Lindsey realized that their greatest gift was not just in loving Shadowfax, but in letting him go with dignity, surrounded by family, holding on to every moment until the very end. The morning came soft and gray, dew still clinging to the wild grass around the barn. Lindsey awoke to the gentle shifting of hay beneath her and the subtle ache in her limbs, a reminder of the long nights and longer days spent by Shadowfax's side. For a moment, she listened, hoping for the familiar sounds of him rising, the snuffle of his breath, but found only silence and the distant calls of meadowlarks. She rose, careful not to disturb Matt, who lay curled under a quilt nearby. The barn was quiet, holding its breath. As Lindsey stepped over to Shadowfax's stall, she saw him lying peacefully, his dark eyes half closed, every breath shallow. He looked up at her, and in his gaze Lindsey recognized the silent conversation they'd shared for years, gratitude, love, and a gentle farewell. A lump formed in her throat. She reached for the halter, stroking his head, her hand trembling. "Hey, old friend," she whispered, voice thick with sorrow and affection. "It's a beautiful morning. Want to see the vineyard with me?" His ear twitched in answer. Matt stirred and came to her side. Brooke arrived soon after, having slept in the main house but rising before dawn out of loyalty and love. Lindsey's parents joined them, somber but resolute, each wearing the marks of sleepless nights, eyes red-rimmed, but determined to give Shadowfax the only gift left, one last walk under the open sky. The family bundled in sweatshirts and flannel, bracing themselves for what had to come. Lindsey slipped a faded blue lead rope over Shadowfax's neck, and, with Matt steadying his other side, gently coaxed him out of the stall. Each step was slow, deliberate, a lesson in patience and presence. The barn doors swung wide, letting in the sweet chill of the new day. Outside, the sky was just beginning to burn with the promise of sunrise. Shadows stretched long across the vineyard. Lindsey led Shadowfax down the familiar path between rows of ancient grapevines, her other hand pressed to his shoulder. She began to hum an old lullaby, the same tune her grandmother had sung to her on anxious nights. The song floated through the air, gentle and bittersweet. Shadowfax's steps grew more hesitant, but every time he faltered, Lindsey murmured encouragement, her voice soft and steady. "That's it, boy. Just a little farther." Matt walked alongside her, his hand sometimes on Shadowfax's mane, sometimes resting on Lindsey's back. They said little. Words would have been too sharp, too final, but the silence was full, carrying everything they couldn't express. Brooke trailed behind, phone forgotten, wiping at her eyes as she watched the trio moving through the morning mist. Lindsey's parents brought up the rear, sometimes pausing to recall a memory, sometimes whispering gratitude for all that Shadowfax had given their family. They stopped by the wild roses that grew along the fence, and Lindsey picked one, tucking it behind Shadowfax's ear. He flicked it off, as if to remind her that some things could never be tamed. When they reached the crest of the vineyard hill, the family gathered close. The world below seemed washed in silver and gold, endless rows of vines, the distant silhouette of the Carter farmhouse, the echo of laughter and heartbreak that lived in these fields. Lindsey sat in the grass beside Shadowfax, pulling him close, her arms wrapped around his neck. She pressed her cheek to his mane, breathing in the warm, familiar scent of earth and horse, of memories too vast to name. One by one, her loved ones came and knelt beside the old stallion. Matt stroked Shadowfax's muzzle, voice rough as he whispered, "Thank you for trusting us, for teaching us what loyalty means." Brooke pressed her forehead to Shadowfax's shoulder, sobbing quietly. "You made Lindsey whole," she choked out. Lindsey's mother kissed the horse's brow, and her father simply rested a hand on his side, silent tears tracing down his weathered cheeks. Lindsey could feel Shadowfax growing weaker, his breath coming in slow, soft waves. She sang the lullaby again, this time joined by Matt, their voices tangled with sorrow and love. As the last notes faded, Lindsey whispered, "You can rest now. I'll be all right, I promise." The air grew still. Lindsey cradled Shadowfax's head in her lap as he released a final, gentle breath. His eyes fluttered closed, and his body relaxed. For a heartbeat, the world paused. Then, as if on cue, the sun rose fully above the hills, bathing the vineyard in golden light. No one moved. Lindsey sat in stunned silence, feeling the weight of her grief and the grace of having loved so deeply. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks as Matt wrapped his arms around her, pressing her close. Brooke leaned in, and Lindsey's parents folded them all into a trembling embrace. There were no words, no ceremony, only the hush of loss, the miracle of having had this time together, the knowledge that Shadowfax had left surrounded by family, love shining around him like a benediction. Later, as Lindsey traced the lines of Shadowfax's face one last time, she felt a strange, fragile gratitude pushing through her heartbreak. He hadn't been alone. He had been cherished until the very end. That night, the family sat on the porch, sharing stories and laughter through their tears. Lindsey felt Shadowfax's presence in every breeze, every shadow moving over the fields. She knew she would carry him with her always, his memory braided into her heart. A lesson in loving, in letting go, and in finding courage to say goodbye. In the quiet that followed Shadowfax's passing, the Carter Ranch felt strangely suspended, as if the world itself were pausing to honor the memory of the horse who had shaped so many lives. Lindsey moved through the farmhouse and the barn with a hollow ache in her chest, her hands often reaching for the comfort of routines now painfully empty. There were mornings she stood at the pasture gate, waiting for the sound of hoofbeats that no longer came. Even the air seemed different, holding the echo of loss like a soft, persistent hum. Lindsey kept Shadowfax's old bridle on her nightstand, coiled carefully, the worn leather still scented with sweat and sunlight. At night, she reached out to touch it, grounding herself in memory. The first few weeks were the hardest, her sleep fractured, dreams haunted by the gentle nudge of a velvety nose or the thunder of distant hooves across green fields. Sometimes she woke before dawn, certain she'd heard him whicker, only to find the barn dark and still. Matt, ever patient, held her through the worst nights, asking nothing but offering everything: warmth, coffee, a steady presence beside her on long, silent walks through the vineyard. But life has its own quiet wisdom. Even as Lindsey's grief pressed in, the rhythms of the ranch continued. Grapevines needing pruning, fences needing mending, the morning chorus of birds returning as spring crept in. Small gestures from neighbors and friends began to fill the empty spaces. A casserole on the porch, a wildflower bouquet left at the gate, handwritten notes sharing stories of beloved horses gone too soon. Each act of kindness was a thread, pulling Lindsey back toward the world she'd nearly abandoned in her sorrow. Matt never once tried to rush her healing. One morning, as the sun broke over the hills and painted the kitchen golden, he set a cup of coffee in front of her and said gently, "You don't have to move on, but maybe, just maybe, you could let something new in." He nodded toward the barn, where, weeks earlier, a local rescue group had reached out about an anxious young Mustang in need of a home. At first, Lindsey resisted. The thought of another horse, another bond, another inevitable goodbye. It felt impossible. But the invitation lingered, quietly persistent. On a rainy afternoon, she finally agreed to visit the Mustang rescue on the edge of town. The place buzzed with energy, children laughing, volunteers bustling between stalls, the air sharp with the scent of hay and wet earth. As Lindsey entered the main barn, a black filly caught her eye. The horse was smaller than Shadowfax, her coat a glossy midnight, her eyes dark and wary. She pressed herself to the far end of the pen, muscles tense as Lindsey approached. Something in the filly's gaze, hope battling with fear, struck a familiar chord. Lindsey stood at the rail for a long while, just watching, remembering what it was to be fragile and uncertain. The rescue director, a cheerful woman with wind-burned cheeks, came over. "That's Spirit," she said. "We pulled her from a bad situation. She's not sure what to make of people yet, but she's got a spark." Lindsey nodded, her heart twisting in both pain and possibility. She whispered Shadowfax's name beneath her breath, seeking permission, then reached into her pocket and pulled out an apple, offering it across the fence. Spirit hesitated, nostrils flaring, but curiosity won out. She stepped forward, snatched the apple from Lindsey's hand, and retreated, chewing thoughtfully. Lindsey smiled for the first time in weeks. It was a start. The adoption process moved quickly. Matt helped ready the old stall and fix the paddock fence. Brooke stopped by with flowers and stories, and even Lindsay's parents pitched in, sweeping the barn aisle and stacking bales of hay. On the day Spirit arrived, a gentle rain fell, turning the world soft and green. Lindsay waited at the gate, heart pounding, as the trailer rolled in. Spirit emerged blinking, every muscle quivering, but as Lindsay whispered quiet encouragement, the filly allowed her to slip on the lead rope and guide her home. The first days were tentative. Spirit shied from sudden movements, her trust easily fractured. Lindsay spent hours sitting in the stall, reading aloud, sometimes just humming while Spirit circled warily. Little by little, the filly crept closer, her head eventually settling into Lindsay's lap. Each small victory, a nuzzle, a playful buck in the pasture, felt like a seed of hope, rooting itself in ground once barren. It wasn't just Spirit who changed. Lindsay felt her own heart shifting, making room for new love without betraying the old. She talked to Shadowfax as she walked the filly through the vineyard, telling him about Spirit's quirks and triumphs, asking for patience on days when progress stalled. Matt joined her on evening walks, laughter slowly finding its way back into their lives. Word spread quickly through the valley. Neighbors stopped by to meet Spirit, bringing treats and gentle hands. Children visited on weekends, their wonder contagious. The barn filled again with the music of life, hoofbeats, laughter, the sweet rush of wind through open doors. Each day Lindsay marveled at the filly's transformation. Spirit, once fearful, now galloped across the pasture, mane flying, sunlight streaming behind her like a banner of hope. In helping Spirit heal, Lindsay discovered her own wounds softening. She realized that Shadowfax's true gift had never been just his companionship, but the way he'd opened her heart to love, risk, and renewal. His legacy wasn't finished. It was alive in every act of kindness, every rescue, every step forward, no matter how hesitant. One quiet evening, as the sky flared with the colors of sunset, Lindsay leaned against the paddock fence, watching Spirit graze contentedly. Matt joined her, slipping his arm around her shoulders. "He'd be proud of you," he murmured. Lindsay smiled, tears glimmering. "He's still here," she whispered. "Every time I help Spirit, I feel him." As darkness settled over the ranch, Lindsay understood. Loss and love would always walk together. But from their union, something beautiful could grow. Spirit's trust was a promise, a living bridge between past and future. The seeds of renewal, sown in sorrow, were blooming at last. The weeks following Shadowfax's passing moved with a strange, dreamlike clarity. Lindsay found herself both broken and awake, as if loss had stripped away every layer of numbness she'd ever built. The world outside kept spinning, grapevines growing wild, the hills greening in the gentle spring rain. But inside, something essential had shifted. She caught herself tracing the faded scars on the barn door, whispering old stories into the morning light, telling them for herself, for Shadowfax, for the family that had grown from his gentle presence. It was Matt who suggested, quietly, that she find a way to honor her old friend. "You could help more horses, Lindsay," he said one evening as they stood on the porch, watching the sun bleed orange across the valley. "Maybe what you learned with Shadowfax, maybe you could share it. Maybe that's his real legacy." At first, Lindsay was hesitant. It felt impossible to give her heart again, to let another animal into the space Shadowfax had filled so completely. But Matt's words lingered, persistent and true. A few days later, Lindsay received an invitation to speak at a local equine therapy fundraiser. She hesitated, nerves prickling under her skin. She wasn't used to sharing her story in front of strangers. But something in her needed to speak, needed to give voice to what Shadowfax had taught her. Not just about horses, but about life, love, and the courage it takes to lose and love again. The night of the event arrived, bringing together ranchers, therapists, and families from across the Napa Valley. Lindsey stood backstage, twisting her wedding ring with trembling fingers. She thought of Shadowfax, remembered the warmth of his breath, the way he'd always stood beside her in the darkest moments, never asking for more than trust and presence. The MC called her name, and she walked out to the small wooden podium, her heart beating wild and fast. She scanned the room, familiar faces, but also many strangers, each carrying their own invisible stories. Lindsey took a breath, steadying herself. "I lost my horse, Shadowfax, a few weeks ago," she began, her voice breaking only a little. "He was more than a companion. He was my anchor. He saw me through childhood, heartbreak, panic, and joy. I used to think that loving an animal meant you never had to say goodbye, that maybe if you held on tight enough, you could keep the hard parts at bay. But Shadowfax taught me something different." She looked down, pressing a hand to her chest. "He showed me the difference between possession and partnership, that the deepest loyalty isn't about control, it's about trust, about presence, about showing up when it matters, even when your heart is breaking. I tried to save him, just like he once saved me. But in the end, loving him meant letting him go, with dignity, surrounded by family." Her voice trembled, but she didn't stop. "The day Shadowfax died, I realized something. What I lost in him, I found again every time I opened my heart to another animal, another person, another chance. The greatest gift he gave me wasn't just the years we shared, but the way he taught me to risk loving, even knowing it will end in goodbye. To love anyway, to stay anyway, to keep showing up, no matter how hard it gets." There was a hush in the room, a collective holding of breath. Lindsey met the gaze of a young girl in the front row, her arms wrapped around a small, anxious dog. The most profound relationships in our lives are built not on grand gestures, but on sacrifice and presence. The courage to love, even when it's messy, even when it hurts. Family isn't just blood. Family is who you choose to stand beside you in your brightest and your darkest moments. Every act of rescue, whether it's a horse, a person, or yourself, sends ripples of hope outward. Sometimes you never even see where those ripples land. As she finished, Lindsey's voice broke for good. Tears streaked her face, but she didn't try to hide them. The audience stood, some wiping their own eyes, others simply nodding, holding hands with loved ones. Afterward, people gathered around her, sharing their own stories of loss and love, of dogs and horses, of parents and friends, of the ways grief and hope are forever braided together. The next day, Lindsey visited the Mustang rescue. Her heart ached as she stepped into the corral, memories of Shadowfax almost too sharp to bear. But as she reached out to a young, anxious black filly, Spirit, she felt something shift. Spirit's eyes were wary, but there was hope there too, a flicker of trust waiting to be rekindled. Lindsey knew it would be a slow process, one that required patience, gentleness, and the willingness to risk heartbreak all over again. But she was ready. She was stronger now, not because she'd avoided pain, but because she'd walked through it. Word of Lindsey's speech spread through Napa Valley. The community rallied to support older horses, raising money for medicine, shelter, and sanctuary. Volunteers offered to help at the rescue. Neighbors showed up with blankets and hay. Children drew pictures of Shadowfax and Spirit. Lindsey saw firsthand how every act of compassion echoed beyond its origin, touching lives she'd never met. Sitting on the porch that night, Lindsey held Matt's hand as Spirit grazed in the pasture. The ache in her heart was still there, but it was softer, wrapped in gratitude and the promise of new beginnings. She understood, finally, that Shadowfax's true legacy was not just in the years they shared, but in the courage to keep loving, keep rescuing, and keep hoping, no matter how many times her heart would have to say goodbye. 1 year later, dawn crept gently over the rolling hills of Napa Valley, painting the vineyard in delicate strokes of gold and lavender. The Carter Ranch stirred to life in the cool air, dew shimmering on grape leaves, and the low hum of morning filling the world with promise. Lindsey stood quietly at the edge of the pasture, a bundle of wildflowers in her hands, her gaze lingering on the horizon where the land met the sky in an endless, hopeful line. Matt joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as Spirit, the once nervous black filly, grazed nearby, her coat gleaming in the rising sun. Spirit had changed in the past year. The wild fear in her eyes had softened, replaced with curiosity and trust. She was playful, bold, and sometimes stubborn, her energy a living echo of Shadowfax's gentle strength. Lindsey felt the ache of loss still, but it had become something new, an undercurrent of gratitude, a quiet assurance that love, once given, never truly vanished. With practiced hands, Lindsey slipped Shadowfax's old halter from her shoulder and draped it over the fence post overlooking the hills. For a long moment, she traced the worn leather, the faded brass, remembering every mile they'd traveled together. Tears blurred her vision, but she let them come, her heart a tangled knot of grief and joy. "Thank you," she whispered, voice carried away by the breeze. "You're still here in every step I take." Spirit lifted her head, ears twitching, then trotted to Lindsey's side. Lindsey smiled and knelt, letting the filly nuzzle the bouquet from her hands. As she pressed her forehead to Spirit's, she felt the pulse of new beginnings, loss opening space for hope, love returning in a form both familiar and brand new. Matt knelt beside them, their hands entwined, and together they watched the morning unfold. The vineyard was alive with quiet motion, workers gathering for the day's harvest, neighbors waving from the road, children chasing each other between rows of green. Lindsey could hear laughter, the lowing of distant cattle, the gentle whicker of horses from the rescue barn she and Matt had started in Shadowfax's honor. In the past year, the Carter Ranch had become more than home. It was a sanctuary, a place where broken things were gently mended, where stories of loss turned slowly, beautifully, into stories of hope. At noon, the family gathered for a picnic on the hill. Lindsey's parents arrived first, arms full of sandwiches and lemonade, her mother's eyes bright with pride and the easy joy that had returned to her smile. Brooke arrived next, her laughter filling the air as she recounted a new tale from the Mustang rescue. There were new faces, too. Volunteers, neighbors, families who'd come to adopt and to learn, all drawn by the legacy Shadowfax had left behind. After the meal, Lindsey rose and asked everyone to join her by the old oak overlooking the vineyard. Spirit grazed at her side, sunlight sparkling on her coat. Lindsey took a steady breath, her heart pounding with the weight of what she wanted to say. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice carrying in the open air. "A year ago, I stood in this spot and said goodbye to a friend who had been with me since I was a child. I thought losing Shadowfax would break me, and it did for a while. But as I look around today, I see what he left behind. This rescue, these friendships, the courage to love again, even knowing the risk. She glanced at Spirit, the filly's dark eyes watching her intently. Shadowfax taught me that legacy isn't measured by the years we get, or by the perfection of a life. It's measured by the hearts we touch, the hope we spark, and the kindness we give, especially when it would be easier to turn away. Every ending is just the beginning of another story, if we have the courage to open our hearts. The crowd was silent, listening. Lindsey continued, "We honor those we've lost by loving again, by choosing kindness, by showing up for those who need us, on 2 legs or 4. Every rescue, every act of care, every hand extended in hope sends ripples outward. You might never know where they land, but they matter." She looked at Matt, at her parents, at Brooke, and at the circle of faces gathered around. If Shadowfax taught me anything, it's that love never truly ends. It changes shape. It leads us forward. It gives us the strength to try again, to risk our hearts again. That's the real gift. She pressed the old halter against her heart, then hung it high on the oak branch, a beacon and a blessing. Spirit whinnied softly, and Lindsey smiled, tears glinting on her cheeks. "Let's keep this going," she called out, voice growing steady, strong. "Let's rescue, let's show up, let's love fiercely, for Shadowfax, for Spirit, for everyone who needs a second chance." The applause that followed was quiet, reverent, full of something sacred. In that moment, Lindsey felt at peace, not because the grief was gone, but because it had been transformed into purpose. As the sun sank low, Lindsey, Matt, and Spirit walked the vineyard's edge, their shadows stretching long across the grass. Lindsey paused at the fence, looking out at the world beyond. She felt Shadowfax's presence, not as absence, but as wind in the grass, warmth in the sun, strength in every step she took. The horizon stretched before her, wide and wild, full of unknown chapters. And as she moved forward, hand in hand with Matt, Spirit trotting by her side, she understood, deep down, that every ending could become a new beginning, if she was willing to keep her heart open. In the years to come, the Carter Ranch would rescue hundreds of horses, bring hope to countless families, and become a beacon for anyone searching for healing. Lindsey's story, and Shadowfax's, would ripple outward, quiet, steady, endless as the horizon itself.